The radar screen flickered once, twice, then went dark. Lieutenant Commander Vega Phantom Castellanos pressed her palm against the instrument panel of her FA-18E Super Hornet, feeling the familiar hum of $67 million worth of American engineering beneath her fingertips. But something was wrong. The coordinates displayed moments before had shown a SEAL team 43 nautical miles beyond their designated extraction point, deep in Syrian airspace, where no American boots were supposed to be. Control, this is Phantom. I'm showing anomalous readings on my scope. Can you confirm SEAL Team Alpha's position? Her voice cut through the static, steady despite the ice forming in her stomach. The silence that followed stretched too long. In her 7 years of naval aviation, Vega had learned that silence from command meant one of two things. Either they didn't know, or they knew too much. The Mediterranean sun hung low on the horizon, painting the cockpit amber as she banked east toward the Syrian coast. Below, the sea looked deceptively peaceful, its surface broken only by the occasional whitecap. But Vega knew better. Somewhere in that hostile territory, 8 American warriors were counting on her to bring them home. Phantom, control. The voice finally crackled through her headset, tinged with the kind of tension that made seasoned pilots reach for their ejection handles. We have a situation. SEAL Team Alpha missed their extraction window. Last communication was 47 minutes ago. Vega's jaw tightened. 47 minutes in enemy territory was an eternity. Her aircraft commander, Captain Morrison, had specifically ordered her to maintain patrol pattern Alpha 7, a safe corridor 20 miles offshore. But safe corridors didn't save lives. They just kept bureaucrats comfortable in their air-conditioned command centers. She thought of the last time she'd seen Team Alpha's leader, Senior Chief Martinez, during the pre-mission brief. He'd looked directly at her, not through her like most of the other operators, and said, "We're counting on you, Phantom. Bring us home if things go sideways." There had been something in his eyes, a recognition that transcended rank and gender. He'd seen her personnel file. 3 tour, 47 combat missions, 0 friendly fire incidents. But more importantly, he'd seen something the others often missed. The same burning commitment to the mission that kept him awake at night. Now, as her radar swept the hostile coastline, Vega faced a choice that would define not just her career but her conscience. Protocol demanded she maintain position and wait for orders, but 8 lives demanded something else entirely. She checked her fuel gauge, calculated intercept courses, and began her descent towards Syrian airspace. Some orders, she realized, were meant to be broken. The radio erupted with chatter as ground control noticed her deviation. But Vega was already gone, disappearing into the golden haze that separated the living from the legend. The Syrian coastline emerged from the heat shimmer like a mirage made manifest, all jagged rocks and hidden coves where ancient civilizations once launched their own warriors into uncertain seas. Vega's Super Hornet cut through the air at 400 knots, her engine's twin exhausts leaving contrails that would dissipate long before anyone on the ground could triangulate her position. She dropped to 200 feet above the water, using the Earth's curvature as her shield. Phantom, control. You are ordered to return to patrol station immediately. Captain Morrison's voice carried the weight of military justice and career-ending paperwork. Acknowledge immediately. Vega reached for her radio switch, then hesitated. In that moment of silence, she remembered why they called her Phantom. Not because she was invisible, though her approach to target was often undetected until the last possible second, but because of what had happened over Afghanistan 3 years ago. A downed pilot, 6 hours behind enemy lines, Taliban closing in from 3 sides. Everyone said it was too late, too dangerous, too far beyond the reach of conventional rescue. Everyone except Vega. She'd appeared like a ghost over the mountains, her ordnance clearing a landing zone in terrain that shouldn't have accommodated anything larger than a helicopter. The pilot lived. The Taliban learned to fear the sound of American jets, and Vega earned a call sign that followed her from squadron to squadron, always whispered with the same mixture of admiration and unease. "Control, Phantom. I'm experiencing intermittent radio difficulties." She modulated her voice to suggest technical problems while her fingers worked across the communication panel with practiced precision. Not lying, exactly, more like creative interpretation of electromagnetic interference. Switching to backup frequency. She changed channels and immediately heard what she'd been hopping for, the faint, desperate whisper of an emergency beacon. SEAL Team Alpha's distress signal, barely perceptible above the atmospheric noise, pulsing from coordinates that made her blood run cold. They were 15 miles inland, surrounded by Syrian Republican Guard positions that intelligence had supposedly neutralized weeks ago. Her heads-up display painted the tactical picture in stark relief. Surface-to-air missile sites formed a defensive ring around Damascus, their search radars sweeping the sky like deadly lighthouse beams. Between her position and the SEALs lay 30 miles of hostile territory, dotted with anti-aircraft artillery and enough enemy combatants to turn her rescue mission into a suicide run. But as Vega studied the threat assessment scrolling across her screens, she noticed something the mission planners had missed. There was a gap in the defensive coverage, a narrow corridor where the mountains created a radar shadow. It would require flying at treetop level through terrain that could shred her aircraft if she made even the smallest navigational error. It was the kind of flying that separated legends from casualties. She banked hard left and began her descent into the Valley of Shadows. The first surface-to-air missile launched when Vega was still 8 miles from the SEAL position, its heat signature blooming like a deadly flower on her threat display. She pulled 4GS in a climbing turn, feeling her vision tunnel as blood drained from her brain, then rolled inverted and dove toward the deck. The missile, designed to intercept high-altitude bombers, lost lock as she disappeared into the ground clutter. "Phantom to any friendly, I'm taking heavy fire. Can anyone confirm SEAL Team Alpha's status?" She kept her voice level despite the symphony of warning tones filling her cockpit. Her radar warning receiver lit up like a Christmas tree as search radars painted her aircraft from multiple directions. They knew she was here now. The element of surprise was gone. A voice crackled through the static, weak but unmistakably American. "Any station this net, this is Kodiak 6. We are combat ineffective, 4 wounded, requesting immediate extraction. Grid follows, 37 Quebec November 558829. Senior Chief Martinez." Vega recognized his voice despite the strain and exhaustion. She plotted the coordinates on her moving map display and felt her heart sink. The SEALs were pinned down in a cluster of buildings at the base of a valley, surrounded by Syrian forces who had cut off every escape route. Worse, they were only 300 meters from a Russian-built SA-6 missile system that could swat her Super Hornet from the sky before she could line up an attack run. "Kodiak 6, Phantom. I have your position. Stand by for close air support." She began calculating approach angles, trying to find a solution to an impossible tactical equation. To reach the SEALs, she'd have to fly directly over the missile site. To suppress the missile site, she'd have to expose herself to concentrated anti-aircraft fire from the surrounding hills. Her fuel gauge showed 18 minutes of flight time remaining, just enough to make one pass before she'd be forced to turn for the carrier, leaving the SEALs to face their fate alone. But as Vega rolled into her attack run, something unexpected happened. Her threat display showed the SA-6 system rotating away from her aircraft, its radar beam sweeping toward the north. For a moment, she couldn't understand why the enemy would turn their most effective weapon away from an immediate threat. Then she heard it, the distant thunder of rotor blades echoing off the valley walls. A helicopter was approaching from the opposite direction, and the Syrians were repositioning to engage what they perceived as the primary threat. Someone else had joined the battle, someone who was drawing enemy attention away from her approach vector. It was the break she needed. Vega armed her weapons and dove toward the Syrian positions, her jet engine screaming defiance as she committed to a course that would either save 8 American lives or end her own in a ball of fire and twisted metal. The helicopter revealed itself as Vega crested the ridgeline, a weathered U-60 Black Hawk bearing no visible markings, its olive drab paint scarred by years of combat operations. It was flying a classic diversionary pattern, staying just beyond effective range of the Syrian positions while drawing their fire away from the SEAL team's location. But even as she watched, she could see muzzle flashes winking from the surrounding hills as enemy forces concentrated their efforts on the more visible target. Unknown Black Hawk, this is Phantom. Identify yourself and clear the area immediately. I'm beginning my attack run. Vega's finger hovered over the weapon release trigger, her targeting system locked onto a cluster of buildings where Syrian infantry had taken position. Phantom, Ghost Rider, negative on clearing the area. We're here for the same package you are. The pilot's voice carried a slight accent she couldn't quite place, but his radio discipline was unmistakably American military. We'll maintain diversionary fire while you service the targets. Kodiak team is in the white building, northwest corner of the compound. Vega hesitated for half a second. Ghost Rider wasn't on any flight manifest she'd seen, and the Black Hawk's appearance in Syrian airspace raised questions she didn't have time to answer. But tactical situations demanded trust, and right now the mysterious helicopter was buying her the precious seconds she needed to line up her shots. She rolled inverted and pulled her nose through the horizon, diving toward the Syrian positions at a 70-degree angle. Her heads-up display painted target symbols across the landscape as her weapons system identified threats and calculated engagement parameters. The SA-6 missile sight sat like a mechanical spider in its reinforced position, its radar dish still tracking the Black Hawk's movement. Kodiak 6, Phantom. Danger close fire mission, 200 meters northeast of your position. Keep your heads down. She squeezed the trigger and felt her aircraft shudder as 2 AGM-65 Maverick missiles separated from their wing pylons. The infrared-guided weapons streaked downward, their white-hot exhaust trails scribing lines of destruction across the Syrian afternoon. The first missile impacted the SA-6's radar antenna, sending twisted metal and electronic components cascading down the hillside in a shower of sparks. The second found the missile launcher itself, transforming $30 million of Soviet engineering into a fireball that rose 300 feet into the air. Secondary explosions rippled through the position as stored ordnance cooked off, creating a chain reaction that would be visible from orbit. But Vega's celebration was premature. Her threat display immediately lit up with new contacts as mobile anti-aircraft guns emerged from camouflage positions throughout the valley. The Syrians had been prepared for exactly this scenario, using the fixed missile site as bait while positioning their real defensive assets in locations where they could engage any aircraft attempting a rescue mission. She pulled out of her dive and began jinking left and right as 23 cannon shells traced glowing paths through the air around her aircraft. One round punched through her port wing, creating a spider web of cracks in the composite material but missing any critical systems. Her luck was holding, but luck had a way of running out at the worst possible moments. The Black Hawk was taking heavy fire now, its pilot performing evasive maneuvers that pushed the aircraft to the edge of its performance envelope. Vega watched through her heads-up display as tracers converged on the helicopter's position, several rounds sparking off its armored hull. She could hear the strain in Ghost Rider's voice as he fought to maintain control while providing covering fire for the SEALs below. Phantom, Ghost Rider, we're taking significant damage. Don't think we can maintain this much longer. The transmission was punctuated by the distinctive sound of rounds impacting metal, followed by warning tones from the helicopter's systems. Kodiak team is moving to the extraction point, but they've got wounded. We need someone to clear the landing zone. Vega checked her remaining ordnance. 4 Mark 82 500-pound bombs, and approximately 200 rounds of 20 cannon ammunition. Enough firepower to level a city block, but she'd have to use it with surgical precision to avoid hitting the SEAL team. The extraction point was a small clearing barely large enough for the Black Hawk, surrounded by buildings that could be sheltering enemy fighters or innocent civilians. Ghost Rider Phantom, I'll clear the zone, but I need you to mark friendly positions with smoke. She began her second attack run, this time approaching from the west to avoid the remaining anti-aircraft positions. Her aircraft was beginning to feel sluggish as battle damage accumulated, but her engines were still producing full power and her flight controls remained responsive. Kodiak 6 Phantom, mark your position with smoke, then move to extraction point on my signal. She could see figures moving between the buildings below, some in the distinctive desert camouflage of American Special Operations Forces, others in the motley uniforms of Syrian regulars. The challenge was distinguishing between them while flying at 400 knots through a valley filled with hostile fire. Purple smoke began rising from the white building where the SEALs had taken shelter, followed by green smoke from the landing zone itself. But even as she watched, muzzle flashes erupted from windows and rooftops throughout the compound as Syrian forces attempted to prevent the rescue. She could see the distinctive figures of the SEAL team moving in tactical formation toward the extraction point, two operators carrying a wounded teammate between them. Vega selected her cannon and began a strafing run that would take her directly over the Syrian positions. Her targeting computer painted symbols across buildings where enemy fighters had revealed themselves, calculating bullet trajectories and impact points with mechanical precision. But behind those symbols were human beings, soldiers following orders, defending their homeland against what they perceived as foreign invaders. For a split second, she hesitated. Then she remembered Senior Chief Martinez's words about bringing his team home, and her finger found the trigger. The M61 Vulcan cannon beneath her aircraft began its deadly song, sending depleted uranium rounds downrange at 6,000 rounds per minute. Buildings exploded in clouds of concrete dust and debris as the high-explosive incendiary shells found their targets, clearing a path for the SEAL team's escape. The Black Hawk was settling into the landing zone as Vega pulled out of her strafing run, its rotor wash creating a miniature sandstorm that obscured the SEAL team's movement. She could see the operators moving with practiced efficiency despite their desperate situation, two teams providing overwatch while the others loaded their wounded teammates aboard the helicopter. But Syrian reinforcements were arriving from the north, a convoy of armored vehicles racing through the valley toward the extraction point. Ghost Rider, you've got company coming. Military vehicles, Grid 37 Quebec Mike 4466, ETA 3 minutes. Vega rolled her aircraft and prepared for another attack run, but her threat display was showing new problems. Her port engine was beginning to overheat, battle damage finally taking its toll on her aircraft systems. Oil pressure was dropping, and she could feel a subtle vibration through the flight controls that suggested structural fatigue. Phantom, Ghost Rider, we're loaded and ready to lift, but we won't clear the valley before those vehicles arrive. The helicopter pilot's voice was tight with concentration as he fought to maintain control of his damaged aircraft. Can you delay them? Vega looked at her fuel gauge, then at the approaching convoy, then at the SEAL team who were depending on her to get them home safely. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly, but she still had 2 Mark 82 bombs and enough cannon ammunition for one more strafing run. It would have to be enough. Ghost Rider Phantom, get airborne now. I'll handle the convoy. She banked hard right and descended to treetop level, using the terrain to mask her approach from the Syrian vehicles. Her targeting system began painting symbols across the lead vehicles as they wound their way through the narrow valley road, calculating impact points and blast radii with mechanical precision. The lead vehicle was a Russian-built BMP-2 infantry fighting vehicle, its 30 autocannon capable of engaging both ground and air targets. Behind it followed three more BMPs and a pair of T-72 main battle tanks, enough firepower to wipe out a reinforced company of infantry. Against a single damaged Super Hornet and a helicopter full of wounded SEALs, they represented overwhelming odds. But Vega had learned something during her years of combat flying. Overwhelming odds were just another tactical problem waiting for a creative solution. She selected her remaining bombs and began calculating an attack profile that would use the valley's geography to her advantage. If she could trigger a landslide at the right moment, she could block the road and buy the Black Hawk precious minutes to escape. Her aircraft shuddered as she pushed it beyond its design limits, pulling GS that stressed already damaged components to their breaking point. But the Super Hornet held together, carrying her toward a date with destiny that would be remembered long after the battle reports were filed and forgotten. The convoy had reached the narrowest part of the valley when Vega released her first Mark 82, the 500-pound bomb separating cleanly from its wing pylon and arcing toward the steep hillside above the Syrian vehicles. She'd calculated the impact point to trigger maximum geological instability, using the mountain itself as a weapon against the advancing enemy forces. The explosion sent a cascade of rock and debris tumbling down the mountainside, but not quite enough to block the road completely. The lead BMP swerved around the obstacle and continued advancing, its commander clearly determined to prevent the American extraction. Vega rolled inverted and dove for her second bomb run, her damaged port engine now trailing a thin stream of smoke that would make her easy to track against the late afternoon sky. Phantom, Ghost Rider, we're taking fire from the convoy. One of my crew chiefs is hit. The Black Hawk was climbing slowly, struggling to gain altitude with its full load of passengers and battle damage. Vega could see tracer rounds reaching up toward the helicopter as the Syrian vehicles brought their weapons to bear on the escaping aircraft. She armed her final bomb and began what she knew would be her last attack run. Her port engine was losing power steadily now, and her fuel state was approaching the critical point where she'd have to choose between continuing the fight and having enough gas to make it back to the carrier. But the choice had already been made the moment she'd broken protocol and crossed into Syrian airspace. The second Mark 82 impacted directly in front of the lead BMP, the explosion lifting the 20-ton vehicle off the ground and flipping it onto its back in a shower of twisted metal and flame. The blast also completed what the first bomb had started, bringing down enough of the mountainside to completely block the narrow road. The remaining Syrian vehicles were trapped behind a wall of rock and debris, their advance effectively ended. But even as she pulled out of the dive, Vega's threat display lit up with a new and terrifying contact. A surface-to-air missile was tracking toward her aircraft from the valley's eastern rim, launched from a position that had remained hidden throughout the engagement. The weapon's infrared seeker had locked onto her damaged engine's heat signature, and she was too low and too slow to successfully evade. She had perhaps 3 seconds to make a decision that would determine whether she lived to see another sunrise. Her ejection seat was armed and ready, but pulling the handle would mean abandoning her aircraft over hostile territory with no hope of rescue. The alternative was to ride the dying Super Hornet to whatever fate awaited her in the Syrian mountains. In that crystalline moment, Vega thought of Senior Chief Martinez and his team, now safely aboard the Black Hawk and climbing toward friendly airspace. The mission was complete. 8 American warriors would return home to their families because she had chosen to break protocol and follow her conscience instead of her orders. The missile impacted Vega's port engine 3 seconds later, the warhead's detonation severing fuel lines and shredding the turbine blades into metallic confetti. Her Super Hornet rolled violently to the left as the thrust asymmetry overwhelmed her flight controls, but she fought the aircraft level and managed to maintain controlled flight on her remaining engine. Warning tones filled the cockpit as hydraulic pressure dropped and electrical systems began failing in cascading sequences. Mayday, mayday, mayday. Phantom declaring an emergency. Port engine destroyed, multiple system failures, attempting to egress hostile airspace. Her voice remained steady despite the chaos surrounding her, years of training overriding the natural human tendency toward panic. She began climbing slowly toward the coast, nursing every foot of altitude from her damaged aircraft. Phantom, Ghost Rider, we're clear of the valley and heading for friendly airspace. Your position? The Black Hawk pilot's voice carried genuine concern despite his own aircraft's battle damage. In the unwritten code of military aviation, no one got left behind if there was any possibility of rescue. Ghost Rider, Phantom, I'm 20 miles behind you and losing altitude. Don't think I'll make it to the boat. Vega checked her instruments and began calculating glide ratios and emergency landing sites. The Syrian coast offered few options for a forced landing, and her aircraft was hemorrhaging altitude at an alarming rate. Take care of Kodiak team. Tell them it was an honor. But the mysterious Black Hawk was already turning back toward her position, despite the risks of re-entering hostile airspace with wounded personnel aboard. Phantom, Ghost Rider, we don't leave people behind. Can you make it to the coast? Vega looked at her altimeter, then at the rugged terrain sliding past beneath her wings. The mathematics were unforgiving. She was losing altitude faster than she was covering ground, and the Syrian coast was still 15 miles away. Even if she could stretch her glide to reach the water, ejecting over the Mediterranean would mean hours in a life raft with Syrian patrol boats searching for survivors. Her starboard engine was beginning to run rough now, vibrations suggesting that debris from the missile strike had damaged more than just the port power plant. She had perhaps 5 minutes of powered flight remaining before physics took over and reduced her options to zero. But 5 minutes could cover a lot of ground if she was willing to risk everything on one final gamble. Instead of turning toward the coast, Vega banked east toward the Syrian interior, pushing her dying aircraft deeper into hostile territory. Her decision defied every principle of combat survival, but it was based on a tactical calculation that few pilots would have considered. If she was going down anyway, she could at least choose where and how it happened. Phantom, what are you doing? The coast is behind you. Ghost Rider's voice carried the confusion of someone watching a seemingly rational person make an apparently suicidal decision. Trust me, Vega replied, and began descending toward a specific set of coordinates that had burned themselves into her memory during the mission briefing. The abandoned Syrian airfield appeared through the heat haze exactly where intelligence had predicted, its concrete runway cracked and overgrown with weeds but still fundamentally intact. Vega's targeting system identified the strip as runway 27 left, approximately 8,000 feet long, and oriented directly into the prevailing wind. It was perfect for an emergency landing, if she could reach it before her aircraft disintegrated around her. Phantom, Ghost Rider, that's a Syrian military installation. You'll be captured or killed the moment you touch down. The Black Hawk pilot was stating the obvious, but his tone suggested he understood there might be method to her apparent madness. Do you have a plan? Working on it. Vega's starboard engine chose that moment to begin compressor stalling, violent backfires that sent shockwaves through the airframe, and filled her cockpit with the acrid smell of burning fuel. She had perhaps 2 minutes of powered flight remaining, not enough to second-guess her decision or consider alternatives. Her heads-up display painted the runway centerline across her field of view as she aligned her aircraft for what would either be a successful emergency landing or a very public funeral. The abandoned airfield stretched before her like a concrete lifeline, but she could see vehicles moving around the perimeter buildings. The base wasn't as abandoned as intelligence had suggested. All stations, this is Kodiak 6. We have eyes on Phantom's landing site. Place appears to be occupied by irregular forces, possibly Hezbollah or Iranian advisors. Recommend immediate extraction upon touchdown. Senior Chief Martinez's voice cut through the radio chatter with the authority of someone who had made life-and-death decisions in more hostile environments than most people could imagine. Vega felt a mixture of gratitude and concern as she realized the SEAL team was refusing to abandon her despite their own wounds and the helicopter's battle damage. But she also knew that 8 operators and a helicopter crew couldn't assault a fortified position without significant support, and help was hours away, even if Command approved a rescue mission. Her aircraft touched down hard on the broken concrete, the main landing gear taking the impact with grinding protests from overstressed metal. She deployed her drag chute and began heavy braking, fighting to keep the damaged Super Hornet centered on the runway as it shed velocity in a cloud of tire smoke and hydraulic fluid. The aircraft finally rolled to a stop 3,000 feet down the runway, its engines winding down in the relative silence of the Syrian afternoon. Through her canopy, Vega could see armed figures emerging from the perimeter buildings, their weapons and equipment suggesting professional military training rather than civilian militia. She began the engine shutdown checklist with mechanical precision, but her mind was already shifting into survival mode. The real mission was just beginning. The canopy release mechanism functioned despite the battle damage, hydraulic pressure, lifting the transparency with a soft hiss that seemed unnaturally loud in the desert silence. Vega remained in her ejection seat for several seconds, scanning the approaches to her aircraft and calculating distances to available cover. The armed figures were maintaining their distance for now, probably waiting for orders from their commander or trying to determine whether the downed American pilot posed any immediate threat. She began the process of destroying sensitive equipment, following protocols designed to prevent advanced military technology from falling into enemy hands. Her secure radio went first, reduced to sparking electronic components by a small thermite charge. Navigation systems, friend or foe identification codes, and classified frequency settings followed in rapid succession, each elimination accompanied by acrid smoke and the smell of burning silicon. Phantom, Ghost Rider, we're orbiting 5 miles north of your position. Can you reach the perimeter fence? The Black Hawk was maintaining station just outside the range of small arms fire, but Vega could hear the strain in the pilot's voice as he fought to keep his damaged aircraft airborne. They couldn't wait indefinitely. Negative, Ghost Rider. Too much open ground, and I count at least 20 hostiles between me and the fence. Vega climbed down from her cockpit and took cover behind her aircraft's landing gear, using the massive tires as concealment while she assessed her tactical situation. Her survival kit contained a sidearm, emergency rations, and a beacon that would broadcast her position to friendly forces. But friendly forces were hundreds of miles away, and her current situation required more immediate solutions. The sound of approaching vehicles made the decision for her. 2 pickup trucks were racing across the airfield toward her position, their beds filled with armed men who showed every sign of professional military training. She had perhaps 30 seconds before they reached effective small arms range, not enough time to reach any meaningful cover or concealment. But as Vega prepared to make her last stand behind $67 million worth of damaged American technology, something unexpected happened. The vehicle stopped approximately 50 meters from her aircraft, and a single figure emerged from the lead truck. He was wearing the insignia of a Syrian Arab army colonel, but his bearing and equipment suggested special forces training. More importantly, he was carrying a white flag. American pilot. His English was accented but clear, carrying across the tarmac with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. I am Colonel Rashid Qasim, Syrian Arab Army Special Forces. You will surrender your weapons and submit to detention as a prisoner of war. Vega considered her options, none of which offered much hope for long-term survival. Syrian military doctrine regarding captured enemy pilots was ambiguous at best, and her presence in their airspace constituted a clear violation of international law. But the colonel's invocation of prisoner of war status suggested he intended to follow Geneva Convention protocols, at least initially. She stepped out from behind her aircraft's landing gear with her hands visible, but her sidearms still holstered, a calculated gesture that projected confidence without unnecessary provocation. Colonel Kassem studied Vega with the measured gaze of a professional soldier, evaluating both threat and opportunity. His special forces background was evident in the way he positioned himself to maintain tactical advantage while offering the possibility of civilized discourse. Behind him, his men maintained disciplined spacing and muzzle control, their weapons ready but not immediately threatening. You have caused considerable damage to Syrian military assets and civilian infrastructure, Kassem continued, his tone suggesting professional respect despite the circumstances. However, you also demonstrated considerable skill in penetrating our air defenses and completing your mission. I am curious about your identity and the nature of your objectives. Vega maintained her position near the aircraft, calculating angles and distances while presenting herself as a cooperative prisoner. Her survival training had covered this scenario extensively, but classroom instruction bore little resemblance to standing on a Syrian airfield surrounded by hostile forces. Lieutenant Commander Vega Castellanos, United States Navy, serial number 7749985552. Castellanos. Kassem repeated the name as if testing its sound against his memory. Spanish heritage, I assume. There are few women in combat aviation, even in the American military. Your reputation precedes you, Lieutenant Commander. They call you Phantom, do they not? The use of her call sign sent a chill down Vega's spine. Syrian intelligence had been tracking her career with disturbing accuracy, suggesting intelligence capabilities she hadn't expected from a regional power. But knowledge could cut both ways, and reputation sometimes carried weight that rank and firepower could not provide. I am familiar with your previous operations, Kassem continued. Afghanistan 2022, the rescue of Captain Thompson from Taliban forces. Libya 2023, close air support for evacuation operations in Tripoli. And now Syria 2025, the extraction of American Special Operations Forces from sovereign Syrian territory. Each citation felt like a physical blow, but Vega kept her expression neutral. Intelligence files were one thing, operational security was another. The colonel's knowledge suggested either significant infiltration of American military communications or cooperation from sources she didn't want to consider. What do you want, Colonel? She kept her voice level, but her mind was racing through escape scenarios and contingency plans. The Black Hawk was still orbiting somewhere to the north, but any rescue attempt would require precise coordination and considerable luck. Kassem smiled, an expression that contained more calculation than warmth. I want to understand why an experienced American pilot would violate Syrian airspace to rescue 8 men who were operating illegally in my country. Your mission could have started a war, Lieutenant Commander. Surely your commanders understood the risks. The question hung in the desert air like a challenge, and Vega realized she was facing something more complex than simple detention. Colonel Kassem was conducting an interrogation disguised as a conversation, probing for intelligence about American capabilities and intentions. Her answer would determine not just her immediate fate, but potentially the lives of countless others. My commanders, Vega said carefully, ordered me to maintain patrol station 20 miles offshore. The decision to enter Syrian airspace was mine alone. The admission carried significant personal risk, but it also protected higher command authority from Syrian accusations of deliberate aggression. Sometimes sacrificing oneself was the most tactically sound decision available. Kassem's eyebrows rose slightly, a gesture that suggested genuine surprise rather than calculated interrogation technique. You violated direct orders to conduct an unauthorized rescue mission. That requires either extraordinary dedication or remarkable stupidity. Which would you say applies in your case? I'd say it requires understanding the difference between following orders and doing what's right. Vega's response carried an edge that had been absent from her previous answers. 8 American lives were at stake. The mathematics were simple. Simple mathematics. Kasem nodded thoughtfully, then gestured toward her damaged aircraft. And what does your mathematics tell you about your current situation? You are alone in hostile territory, your aircraft is destroyed, and your colleagues cannot rescue you without starting an international incident. How do you calculate those odds? Before Vega could respond, the sound of approaching helicopters echoed across the airfield. But instead of the familiar turbine whine of the Black Hawk, these were Russian-built Mi-8s, their distinctive rotor signatures unmistakable to anyone with experience in Middle Eastern aviation. Syrian reinforcements were arriving, and her window of opportunity was rapidly closing. "Colonel," she said, making a decision based on tactical instinct rather than careful calculation, "I have a proposition for you." Kasem's expression shifted from professional courtesy to sharp attention. "I am listening." "My aircraft contains advanced American military technology, navigation systems, weapons guidance, electronic countermeasures, communication encryption, information that would be extremely valuable to Syrian military intelligence." Vega paused, watching the colonel's face for signs of interest. "I'm willing to provide detailed briefings on these systems in exchange for consideration of my prisoner of war status and eventual repatriation." The offer was calculated to appeal to Kasem's professional priorities while buying time for rescue or escape opportunities. But even as she made it, Vega knew she was walking a razor's edge between acceptable intelligence compromise and outright treason. Her survival training had covered cooperation with enemy forces, but the theoretical guidelines bore little resemblance to the complex realities of actual captivity. Kasem studied her for several long seconds, then nodded slowly. "An interesting proposition, Lieutenant Commander. But first, you must survive the next few minutes. Those helicopters carry officials from Damascus who may not share my appreciation for professional courtesy. I suggest you prepare yourself for a more difficult conversation." The approaching aircraft were already beginning their landing approach, and Vega could see additional vehicles racing across the airfield toward her position. Whatever protection Kasem's military authority provided was about to be challenged by higher-ranking officials with potentially different priorities. The lead Mi-8 touched down in a cloud of dust and debris, its rotors creating a miniature sandstorm that forced everyone to shield their eyes and take cover. As the aircraft settled onto its landing gear, Vega caught sight of the passengers disembarking, 3 men in civilian clothing, whose bearing and equipment suggested intelligence rather than military backgrounds. Syrian Mukhabarat, the regime's security service with a reputation for methods.